two directions for approaching Heidegger: the Strauss direction, Heidegger historicist, um, the Dolphine or Heidegger Dolphine direction, Heidegger as, let's say, in search of a leap, which is in some way comparable to what Nietzsche is in search of, especially if you look at Wilhelm Weisschädel's version of the conflict between Plato and Nietzsche. So let's look at Strauss's position so far as we could still understand it. The more we go in the direction of Heidegger Dolphine, the more this is like a cultural change to where at a certain point the other culture becomes so alien we can't understand it. That's a provisional way of looking at it. It requires more thoughtfulness, of course. But I just tried to indicate something we can grab hold of and then use to go, as it were, further free solo climbing. Strauss sees the question that the ideas can go away in the sense that, for instance, if it would be the case that war, say we have a situation where, just as the United States is, all the states have no serious risk of a civil war anymore, as they did in the 19th century. It wasn't that long ago. It's only a little more than 150 years ago, okay? There was the possibility of war within the United States. It's totally impossible. So far as it's totally impossible, new conditions arise. If the account of things that's the closest to the truth has to always rely on the new conditions, then there's historicism. At the same time, understanding that under people who live under one condition, even if they could magically go back in time by a Star Trek transport, or other people, after they talk to them a little bit, they would get to think this is alien people. We don't understand these people. Who are they? So it says if all ideas are like this, then you have sort of, this is a historicist starting point, and the most direct example is, and probably at the foot of German idealism, you have sort of a notion, anything could be questioned, but you have to show that it's cogent to question it. There's some pressing reason to question it, and then people find out all along what was taken for granted by everyone at all times, at all places, as Strauss likes to say, with this somewhat false phrase. I mean, was it true in the Mario Gambuda's time? The 30 people were living in sort of something closer to the Conan the Barbarian times, as it were. Walled off cities, sometimes cities of 30,000 people living in a walled off city, and their main essence of their existence would be some kind of psychoactive substances. And basically, beyond any sustenance, what they would do is they would go out looking for, in pairs, for psychoactive substances, and one of the pair would take it, and then if they died, the other would go report that. If they survived, they would also report it. Strauss seems to not be too worried about leaving that aside, because he seems to tacitly take something, although he's more on the side of Cicero, more of a political realist who in a certain way thinks Bismarck comes prior to Hashem, if you like, or at least prior to Christ. But nonetheless, you could sort of say, I mean, I guess if you go with Plato, maybe Strauss is more like Plato, that's probably more apt. With Plato, he says basically the things that go in terms of the hegemon nous, or guiding intelligence, ruler intelligence, they would go in a village as well as they would go in a large city. Whereas Aristotle thinks somehow that the polis has a special essence different than the ethnos or the village. Somehow Strauss still thinks this position can be reached. Let's call that the hegemon nous position, the leader intelligence position. That's the position Strauss still holds to. There's this type of hegemon nous, and it can really know things about law, which is, there's this no, and I'll go back to this again when we're looking at it from the Heidegger, as Heidegger Dolphin. So let's look at it from Heidegger Dolphin. Heidegger says we need to repeat the being question because something's wrong here. Wiederholen, ordinary German word repeat. We need to repeat the being question. He said that at the beginning of Sein und Zeit. He doesn't say we need to then land on, he doesn't say we need a life-giving lie. That's what Nietzsche says. He doesn't say, now I'm going to produce a teaching and here's your life-giving lie. And we're going to stop asking, we're going to stop posing, we're going to stop repeating the being question. So the Heidegger Dolphin version, as against the Strauss version, is that the questioning of being keeps repeating, and this is identical to what Heidegger says elsewhere, where he says we must have faith in Geschichte, or in history, or as it were, fate. The way I do it is I say, just as, or destiny is maybe a better translation, I think, as in the destiny of the book. The way I, as it were, gloss this notion in Heidegger is to say both German and Hebrew have imported the Greek word historia, each in their own way. But they each already had another word that was similar. So, yeah, in the Uses and Abuses of History book, Nietzsche keeps going back and forth, and I don't know if this really has any content, but he uses both history and Geschichte in different passages all throughout this short tract, seemingly indifferently. But maybe not. So I think somebody with a better sensibility about that could investigate that. But in Heidegger, yeah, he says we have to have faith in history as a mode, and history specifically, rather than Geschichte or the destiny. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish my thought, actually. What I was going to say is, yeah, in Hebrew there's history and Yizkor, history and Yizkor. In German there's history and Geschichte. There's a native word, and then, and Yizkor really means the memory of the people. It doesn't really mean history in the sense that already in the axial age, the Chinese made all these fine distinctions between here's what the new emperor says happened. The new emperor who's scratched out the names of the last emperor and said how evil he was and everything like that. Here's what the new emperor says. Here's what actually happened, and here's the version that's supposed to sort of make you feel like China has a lot of dignity, the Middle Kingdom. The Chinese, wow. They distinguish three versions already in the axial age. So the China, it's difficult to approach. But I think with the Germans and the Hebrews, it's easier because there's just two big categories, basically. Sort of at the level of the way people, what Hegel, or let's say better Jakob Burckhardt would look at, sort of the way ordinary people have their phatic self concerns, in their maintaining their sort of cave existence. Which is to say metanoic or complex concerns which have been woven into things. So Heidegger says, I must start where I start, and then, okay, let's look at one way connected to the Strauss side that we could think about this. So on the Strauss side, we have, there could be four ways of looking at wisdom or intelligence from the Platonic point of view, which would be courage is regarded as a kind of wisdom, but is regarded as the least sophisticated or most associated with young people or with people with a defect in their intelligence. Second, soprasine, which is like nothing too much, moderation, don't be too emotional. You can't trust yourself with this stuff. It's soprasine. Then there's the Socratic thing, the third thing, phronos. Socrates is a phronimos, and this is a good sense, sound sense, but it's sound sense in a naturalistic way, like Socrates. It's not sound sense in this sense of actually really knowing what the ground of the decisions are for sure, in a way, in the law-like sense. It's not the legal summum bonum. The legal summum bonum has to come from the fourth form of intelligence, which is the hegemon nous that we're talking about, the leader intelligence. That tradition comes to an end with Hegel. Hegel is the last one to talk about, to say, well, now I don't really know what to do with nous anymore. We're in the absolute moment. We don't really need it anymore. It drops nous. This is, we're already in the absolute moment. It's before us. We don't need nous. The hegemon nous is sort of like, it's different, but it's the same position is sort of developed different as Sophos in Aristotle, as wisdom in Aristotle. The pure onlooking of the truth of the ideas and so on. This as a guide. But if we break into this whole field where these different, those four different stations were, and then we put personality in there, and then we say, here's Heidegger. This is a form of intelligence, and it's sort of got sympathetic towards certain things and unsympathetic towards certain things, and into certain things, not into other how does Jaspers put it in terms of receptive, like is receptivity in terms of receptive to certain experiences, receptive to certain um, so-called inner and outer experiences with ideas and books and the like, experience with action and mountain climbing and the like, experience with human beings and the like. Different forms of receptivity to all these fields. I mean, that's just one way of presenting the matter. Okay, but since the question about being is what's being repeated constantly, all these things are before us all the time. And then Heidegger saying, what it's saying in the forest path conversation, for instance, isn't. It's basically, we have all this material, let's throw some of it out there, like, and some of it will sort of act as though it had something to do with Meister Eckhart's specific kind of mysticism, which Heidegger analyzes at length, different earlier, to say that here's the way mysticism was all about in those days at the Reformation and so on, the Grimmheit and all this stuff. I was thinking of Jakob Bohm for a second. Sorry, that's not Meister Eckhart, isn't it? The Grimmheit. Yeah, Meister Eckhart has this notion that's similar to Jaspers, of this coming together of the realms, that God and man are on the same footing, as it were. But this Heidegger regards as, it's a form of methexis thinking in a way, and it's a form of trying to say, how does the idea of it's in Hegel, you'd be like, this is a pretty shabby tree or whatever, what would be the better version? Okay, let's put it in better soil, better climate that's more suited for it. If it's an orange tree, then maybe, depending on where you live, build a hothouse, an orangery, and then see what orange can really be. See what the perfect orange is, what the more perfect orange is, what the perfectest orange is, the most perfect. It's the most elegant way to say it, is the most perfect. And then if you see all these different varieties, and then you see at the center the perpetual, the one that's worth perpetually keeping before us, then you have all these ideas of the different sort of ways, according to some translators, they put it, when Heidegger is saying that, the way we could, if we stop fooling ourselves this way, if we stop putting on a front, if we stop having something before us all the time, how would it be? And then Heidegger's answer is, once we stop putting on a front like this, acting in a certain way, acting like we're in a position because we have the rich story, the tradition, to know something. Heidegger says, if you would really admit this situation of the fallenness, then it amounts to saying we don't know who we are. That's what he's saying in the forest path. So it's sort of like he's throwing up a bunch of stuff that he doesn't really hold by, including a specific version of Eckhart that he understands as a mystical version of the non-duality thinking. But he doesn't believe that we have to start in a position where we make this type of distinction, some type of distinctions as between Bewusstsein or consciousness, which is some kind of representation as against ourselves, as though we were facing off against things. Is that we don't have to start by assuming we're an entity that's facing off against the earth, and then that there could be a non-dualism. Instead, we're asking this radical question about being, but we're repeating it. And so that means exactly, in a certain way, there's something that stands there, but it's allowed to dissipate because it must dissipate, because it's exactly when Heidegger's asked, for instance, what anybody wants to understand by intelligibility, when he's giving his, basically Sorge and intelligibility go together, the concern. It's getting a little bit cold out, for instance, now. Then yeah, it's a concern, and then I could sort of, if I have a habit of dealing with, what do you do when it gets cold out? Put on a shirt, or to go someplace where it's warmer or something. You have a habit, a certain way of dealing with something like that. And then you have some consultation with Dassmann, who has ways of doing it which may be the best ways of doing it, or as it were with the cave. And then we could sort of attempt to make a version of what Heidegger's talking about. But it's always, if we followed Heidegger's main tact, it's going towards the repetition of the Seinfrage, so that we're, in a certain way, it's as if we're only using Dasein as the means to prepare the radical leap. So it's sort of like Heidegger's often saying, yeah, Dasein is sort of the how it happens. He doesn't know how to just leap. So he says, we'll have faith in history, we'll have faith in these different ways to try to make the leap. But therefore, it's a mistake. What almost every scholar does is try to make certain aspects of Heidegger, we're saying, going to the pragma auto, or trying to stay true to the meaning of the hammer or whatever, or the equipment, as Sorge, or as the Dasein on a whole. That would be to treat Heidegger as though we would treat him as though he were Nietzsche saying, here's my life-giving lie. But he's already told us, once we see the real situation, we would just be putting on an act if we were to take up something like that again. Just as Nietzsche is saying something very similar when he said, but in a different, without specifically placing himself in this repetition of the Seinfrage under all this conditions of sort of pressure as to why it's cogent to take up that position. Nietzsche has a different tact there, but in a way, just in a formal way, you could say it's similar, where he says, oh, we must have a life-giving lie as a why, but we know that it's a life-giving, we know that it's it violates the law of non-contradiction to say this is as it were, this that this lie is in a certain way the figure of an absolute Geist picture of what things are. Kafka too does another version of that, where he's saying, the law isn't, it's necessary. The law is only, it's necessary that this happens according to the parable, but not true. So you replace the true with the necessary, but necessary is just some kind of mysterious X, and the truth is becomes equally mysterious. What was this thing that we were talking about? So it's as though you're in some kind of a Kabbalistic smoke or something suddenly once you see that. But What Heidegger does is he tries to say, I mean, Kafka says that too. It's a standard way of talking in a certain way, saying, oh, there's abundance of hope, just not for us, as though to suggest once we made the leap, then we'd be in the other place, but it wouldn't be us.